It should be up there.
Yes, we are live on YouTube. So I'm going to go off, and then Arthur, take it away.
I think Lucas is going to start us off.
Sure. Okay, everybody, welcome. And just give me one. Yeah, I'm going to start us off. Yeah. All right. So, all right. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for taking the time and joining us tonight for our Education First Mayoral Candidates Forum. And sorry, I'm getting a little feedback here. Give me 1 second. Okay, there we go. All right, so I want to thank everyone for taking the time to join us tonight for our Education First Mayoral Forum. Tonight we'll be talking with our five of our New York mayoral candidates about the topic we all care so much about, New York City public school education. But before we get started, I want to thank all 12 of our co-hosts tonight from across the city, the Caribbean American Society of New York, the Chinese American Citizens Alliance of Greater New York, the Forest Hills Asian Association, the League of Asian Americans of New York, the New York City Residents Alliance, New Yorkers for Safer Streets, Parent Leaders for Accelerated Curriculum and Education, Queens Parents United, South Asian Fund for Education, Scholarship, and Training, the Scholastic Merit Fund, UA3, and the United Chinese Association of Brooklyn. I also have the honor of introducing tonight's moderator, Arthur Chien. Arthur is a 3-time Emmy Award-winning newscaster, currently with WNYW TV Fox 5 here in New York City, where his coverage includes doing features, investigative reporting, education, politics, and breaking news. Arthur is also a member of the adjunct faculty at the NYU Arthur L. Carter Journalism Institute. So thank you, Arthur, and I will turn it over to you to introduce tonight's panelists.
Thank you so much. It's my honor to be here, first of all. I think they chose a TV person because our time is tight, so I'm going to keep us all to TV time. Also, you would have gotten a print person up here instead of me. I want to say that New Yorkers are very much known for their opinions, it's hard to get New Yorkers to agree on everything, but while I was canvassing for this and researching, I found all New Yorkers agreed on one thing, and that is that our educational system is in deep trouble. That last word is my description. The other words I'll save since this is not bedtime yet for some New York City public school students. I want to talk about the format first, and then we'll just get started and let the candidates introduce themselves, please. We are going to do a 2-minute introduction from each candidate, and then I will ask a round of questions and get through as many as I can. Candidates will have 90 seconds to respond. If a candidate is name checked, they have the option of a 30-second reply after that. But this is a panel and not a debate. And I've got a lot of questions that people will be angry at me for not asking. So if we could keep it to a panel instead of a debate, that would probably be really helpful. And then when we have just a couple of minutes left, I have a couple of lightning round questions that can help check some boxes for parents who have questions and want them answered. So having said that, thank you everybody for being here and participating. And we're going to start off our introductions in alphabetical order. So we're going to begin with Mr. Adams. You have 2 minutes, sir.
Thank you. Thank you so much for doing this. And you're right. Education is everything. You know, I'll never forget today as a police officer, having a young 11-year-old that was brought into the precinct for a crime, and he could not spell his street name. And I started to really realize that the common denominator to jail is really education. If we don't educate, we will incarcerate. And I know how important it is for us to ensure that we have quality schools throughout our entire city. I was bused out of my community to go to Bayside High School from South Jamaica, Queens. We must redefine education in our city. It is unimaginable that over 60% of Black and brown students do not meet proficiency every year, not just 1 year, but every year. We are measuring from the bottom. We can do a far better job. And during this conversation, I want to share my vision on how we can imagine our schools, ensure that our children stay engaged, and they will be prepared for a future that is going to call for new talents and new skills. So I'm excited about this conversation. And I look forward to the questions that you're going to present as we improve our educational system in New York.
Thank you very much, Mr. Adams. Mr. McGuire, your 2-minute introduction, please.
Thank you for having me. I'm Ray McGuire. Education is what got me here. I grew up on the other side of the tracks in Dayton, Ohio, raised by a single mother who, along with my grandparents, raised me and my 2 brothers, along with half a dozen foster children. Education and the investment that she made in education is what allowed me to have the opportunity. In the 5th grade, I started getting bused. I walked to a 3/4 of a mile to a corner that took me to the bus picked me up going from north of town to south of town. And from that bus, I was able to go from 6th grade to 11th grade. 11th grade, I did pretty well. Teacher said, if you're as good as they say you are, go test yourself against the big boys and girls in the East. And I came East and I tested myself. I was able to go to school in Connecticut and then applied to colleges, went on to Harvard College and then to Harvard Law School and Harvard Business School. Education and the sacrifices of my mother. And I was on scholarship every step of the way. When I got to New York, I had 3 things. I had a great education, I had a lot of student debt, and I had no money. And New York has allowed me, with the experiences I had growing up, with my lived experience, to come to this city and to compete at the highest levels and to be successful and to serve as a model for those others who are coming up, especially the ones who look like me, solely through education. And so I'm fighting for others to have the same opportunities that I had. Education is essential, as it was to me and as it is to all of New Yorkers, especially those who today the system has not addressed, who the system has failed. So thank you for having me, and education is at the core of who I am.
All right, thank you, Mr. McGuire. Ms. Sutton, your 2-minute introduction, please.
Well, thank you so much. Great to be with you all this evening. I completely agree. The next mayor has the sacred privilege and moral imperative to invest fully in the potential of our over 1.1 million school kids here in New York City. You know, I was blessed to serve in the Army for nearly 30 years before getting to New York City. And so many of my privates, my sergeants, my junior officers, lieutenants, many of them came from New York City or places like the underserved neighborhoods in New York City. And they would talk about the frustrations that they had, some successes with their education, others frustrations, and a lot of guilt that their buddies who hadn't been able to find a path to the middle class, a path to service through the military or other means. And they really felt a version of survivor's guilt. And so now in this position, as we look at the challenges and listen to the parents and their frustration and the botched school openings of these last several months, but the problems didn't just start with the pandemic. We know that they've been going on for a long time and been made worse with the needless conflict and pitting of parents and communities against each other. So I'm running for mayor because I want to make a difference. I want to bring New Yorkers together, and I want to invest in the full potential of every one of our youth. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Sutton. Mr. Yang, your 2-minute intro.
Thank you, Arthur. Hello, everyone. It's great to be here with you tonight. I feel like we probably have a lot in common, because if you're here tonight, you're probably a public school parent like I am with my wife, Evelyn. And Evelyn's actually a product of New York's public schools. She went to Stuyvesant. And I know we probably share some of the same frustrations. The 2 that are top of mind for us right now as a family, number 1, we should be fighting harder to open our schools. There's compelling data that it's not dangerous to have small children in contact with teachers, that schools in no environment have been responsible for spreading the virus to adults. We should be fighting harder for the kids who are falling further behind right now. And number 2, I think it's very poor leadership to say you're going to get rid of gifted and talented screening in middle schools and not know what comes next. As a parent, you're looking for certainty and stability and some kind of visibility as to what's going to come next for our children. And when you don't have it, you start looking around. You start thinking, wait, is this the situation I want for my kids? We need better leadership than this. We need someone who's going to prioritize not just education, but communication for our kids. I want to be that mayor.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Yang. I'm going to start with my first question, and I'm going to cut through. I know you get asked this politically a lot, and we're going to try to do it from much more of an education standpoint. The first question is, what are your short and long-term goals to get all of New York City schools functioning at a proficient level? There's a lot of focus on entrance exams and on student outcomes, but what will you do to address whether or not we have strong qualified people going into teaching? How will you address teacher shortage, content knowledge, especially when it comes to math and science? And how will you work with the teachers union to improve teaching? Let's go in reverse order and start with Mr. Yang, please.
I have many friends who are public school teachers here in New York City. I think we have some of the best teachers in the country, but they say to me that in many cases, they don't feel supported. They feel like they're micromanaged. Principals also feel micromanaged. But when you look at what's been successful, the NYC Teaching Fellows program has attracted many folks into the classroom that might not have considered it otherwise. We should be augmenting the NYC Teaching Fellows program, and then we should be trying to invest in the professional development of our teachers, make sure that they're not burning out, make sure that they actually feel like they're able to do their jobs in the classroom, and that they're being properly supported, not just in a time of crisis, but writ large. I was just talking to a former teacher today, and he told me this heartbreaking story that was somewhat similar to Eric's. He said that he was trying to teach his high school class in history, and then his student came up to him afterwards and was looking for lunch money because he hadn't eaten. And it's very difficult for a lot of our kids to learn, in part because there's a lot of stress in their environments. They're not getting basic needs met. So we need to do a better job of actually getting our kids in position to come to class to learn so that our teachers are able to do their jobs effectively.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Sutton. And it was a long question, so if I need to repeat it, please let me know, and I'm happy to do that. But again, so much of the focus is on student outcomes. The question here is, what do we do to get more qualified people into teaching and start improving those standards?
I think that change really starts with changed leadership, not only at the mayor's level, but at the chancellor's level. This chancellor has been needlessly divisive. He has split apart communities. He has created division. He has accused those who don't agree with him of being racist. That's just wrong. That's the last thing we need. So we need a chancellor who understands that the power needs to go down to teachers, to principals. You know, over these last several years, the power has gone up. And in fact, there's been a whole nother layer of executive superintendents in addition to the superintendents who were there before. And when you talk to principals and teachers, they just feel cut out of the action. They don't feel like they have a voice. They know what's going on. They're closest to the ground. They long to engage with communities, with the unions, with parents, with DOE, but they don't have that voice. So I think basic respect is the first step with changed leadership. And then I think continuous engagement, sabbatical opportunities, enrichment programs, invest in the potential of teachers as well as our kids.
All right, thank you very much, Ms. Sutton. Mr. McGuire, just so that I keep the questions a little bit different as we progress, does this mean that we have exactly the individuals in the profession of teaching that we need as you answer this question of what your short-term actions and long-term actions would be to improve conditions at all New York City schools?
So first of all, teaching is fundamental, and the teachers, each of us can look at our lives and how our lives have been impacted. They've been impacted by teachers. My 94-year-old mother-in-law is a teacher. She's a teacher, then a curricular planner, then an assistant principal, then a principal. And what we need to do is we need to begin to invest early. And the plan that I have, the vision I have, is called Cradle to Career, which means that pre-K is good, but we need to start before pre-K, because as we know, and the teachers know, we need to invest in these kids before pre-K, from 0 to 4, because we know that as these children are developing, they're learning. And I want to go from 0 to 4, and then I want to go to make sure when they arrive at pre-K that they're prepared. Then I want to go from 0 to the end of the 3rd grade, and I want to be held accountable for every child in New York City being able to read. It goes from 0 to the end of the 3rd grade, these children are learning to read. After that, they're reading to learn. So I want to invest in learning to read up to 0 to the end of the 3rd grade. And then I want to invest further to make sure that the 6th grade that our children get exposed to different opportunities. The way I had a summer job, I want to give them exposure to summer jobs where they become welders or plumbers or people in finance or people who decide to become coders and programmers, that we give them the exposure and that we get the teachers involved early on. And then I want to make sure by the time they graduate that they can go to either a job, a career, or 2 or 4 year college.
All right, Mr.
Starting
Rowe, we'll have more
early.
time to expand on those in a bit, but I want to make sure I give equal time to Mr. Adams. And in particular, I don't think anybody's addressed working with the UFT to improve teaching, but if you would answer the larger question, if you want to also take on the last one.
Thanks so much. First of all, let's deal with short-term and immediate. We have to catch up. Those children, the loss that we've experienced over COVID-19. Research has shown we have not had a substantial drop in English, but we've had a major drop in math. And for the jobs of the future, we have to catch up with that. That means extended school hours. That means weekends. That means also we should not have had last summer off when we knew we already had a time deficit. We should have used those opportunities to catch up. And so the immediates to deal with the trauma children are experiencing, do the lost in education to get them caught up immediately. Long term, we need to look at what I hear people say often. I hear different versions, K through 12, I hear 0 to 3. That's not the science. The science is prenatal through career. Eric Adams as mayor, every mother will have a doula. She needs to know that you turn on genetic markers in the womb that will follow that child throughout his or her life. I'm going to show how you could be part of the brain development of your child in the first 1,000 days, how you eat the right foods so that you don't turn on those genetic markers. And we're going to reinforce the school environment and have a real conversation about summers off. Summers off is something that should be abandoned. We could use technology to have the best online remote learning experience throughout the summer months if it's 2-3 hours a day.
All right, terrific. Thank you very much, Mr. Adams. My next question is on diversity, and I've really dug deep into this. Everybody, every parent, every stakeholder I've talked to talked about the access to quality education. They are focused on the outcome. So we're focusing a lot right now on diversifying the New York City school population. What is the educational value of diversity? Is there some tangible benefit that's not in textbooks, or otherwise is the presumption that a student body must have those of a particular race or ethnicity in order to become a good or successful school? Let's begin with Ms. Sutton, please.
Thank you. Well, you know, there's certainly research that's been done on this, but you don't need a research study to know that diversity is the world. And so for our kids to be able to learn and to make friends and to get along and to figure out life with a classroom of diverse kids, whether it's racial, ethnicity, religion, color, creed, you name it. And of course, here in New York City, we got it all. And I think that there is certainly value in kids learning in different environments and with a whole range of influences and kids from different backgrounds. That said, I think that it's very important to invest in the learning of every child so that we don't ever, for the stated interest of diversity, put kids together who are not yet prepared to learn and achieve at a given level. We can't set kids up for failure, and that's why I think we need to enrich all of our schools. We need to spread the gifted and talented programs, especially to those neighborhoods where they're not existent now, and we need to probably even introduce cross-cultural programs, both within the city as well as between countries. I think it would be a great way to introduce civic engagement as well as an experience with Gotham that our kids could be proud of.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Sutton. Mr. Yang, would you respond to that as well? What is the purpose of diversity?
I think the question's misleading, honestly, Arthur, because you're presenting it as if diversity is meant to improve the learning experience, which I would argue that it does. But the fundamental argument is really that if you have these invaluable public resources, that there need to be kids of every background that represent the population of the city benefiting from those resources, because you're making massive public investments in these let's call them selective high schools. And that if you have kids who only attend the selective high schools from certain backgrounds, then it's not actually helping a representative group of families that should be represented in the most diverse city in the world. Now, the danger here is that what's happening is that it's being turned into some unfortunate tension between outcomes and diversity, and it makes it seem like that the two are opposed to each other. And I would argue that you can actually meet both goals very effectively. I think the problem we have is that we're relying upon one test or one data point as the sole determinant of who's getting into these programs. And I'm going to tell a story from both my wife, Evelyn, and this woman, Marjorie Velasquez, who's running for city council. They were identified for gifted and talented programs when they were young. This was approximately 30 years ago, not to date my wife. You know what I mean, date my wife. Anyway, but they did not have to take a test at age 4 or 5 or 6. Just the teacher identified them and said, hey, we think you got a lot of potential. Like you should be in what was then their version of the gifted and talented program. We should be able to trust our teachers to be able to identify children that actually would benefit from these kinds of enrichment programs and not rely upon a test. We're parents. We know that there's no test that tells us where a child belongs.
All right, thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Mr. Yang. Next response on what is the purpose of diversity is Mr. Adams.
Thank you. And what Andrew just stated is important. I hope to come back to that. The danger of allowing our perceptions of choosing who should be in gifted and talented programs. That's a good intention, but there's some real science that shows that there are perceptions based on ethnicities on what a person's ability is, and that can actually be extremely harmful. Diversity is crucial. All you have to do is look at the Century Foundation study. Students exposed to other students who are different from themselves and the novel ideas and challenges that exposure brings improved cognitive skills, including critical thinking and problem solving. Why is that important? If you go into the jobs of the future is not just being able to fill out a box. The jobs of the future is critical thinking, cognitive skills, communication. That is what the future jobs are going to have. So if we are still using antiquated methods to prepare our children for the future, we're putting them in a terrible place. And 96% of major employees like Wells Fargo's, Fox, and others state that they believe to get the best product out of their employees, they must have the ability to interact and feel comfortable working with colleagues, customers, all clients from diverse cultural backgrounds. This is no longer an option. We must have diversity in our school system to get the product we need for the future.
All right, thank you, Mr. Adams. And just to clarify my question on the back end of it, the implication that diversity, my meaning is, does diversity have funding implications for schools? Are schools that are of a certain makeup more likely to garner more funding? But I'll come back to that if I didn't clarify that. Mr. McGuire, your turn to talk about the importance of diversity, whether it has some sort of educational benefit aside from it being a moral victory.
You know, I want to stay away from the gifted and talented now. I want to focus on the 1 million+ students, not the 30,000. The answer is, it's almost somewhat of a rhetorical question by definition. And in
Just to be clear, sir, I'm not talking about G&T. I am talking about the entire public school system, just to be clear.
So thank you for that 1 million+ students. The answer unequivocally is yes, diversity matters. It just so happens that the systemic inequities that we've inherited here for the past 66, 67 years now, since Brown versus Board of Education, has made us not diverse at all. Not the integration that was designed in the decision versus Brown versus Board, but look at Levittown, which was designed so that we would have a segregated educational system, not an integrated educational system, not a diverse one. There are very few people who exist in leadership roles in the country today, in the world today, that haven't had a diverse experience. So by definition, diversity, in order for us to exist, in order for us to have a future, that is a future that our kids will inherit, they by definition need to be in an environment that is diverse. But while it's diverse, the educational system has to be quality in each of these communities. And so if we relent from that, we have not solved the opportunity and the necessity of diversity. By definition, we need to have a diverse system that needs to be equitable and needs to provide quality in each of our neighborhoods.
All right, thank you, Mr. McGuire. We're now joined by Catherine Garcia. Welcome to the fray. The first question for you is the question of diversity, whether or not it's a right or wrong question, or if there is an educational value to diversity in the system, whether or not there are tangible benefits that are not in textbooks.
Thank you, and I apologize for being late. I was jumping off another Zoom. Diversity is critically important because that is the experience that our children will graduate into in the work world. We also need to ensure that there are resources equally distributed across all of our schools so that we are allowed to have uh, really enriching educational experiences for all the kids in the city of New York. Um, that is, I think we got identified as gifted and talented a bazillion years ago when I was in elementary school, but we were told that we were not special. They were very clear, you were not special if you were in gifted and talented. But it was really about having enriching experiences. And so rather than focus on creating specialty programs, it's about making sure every school has an opportunity, not just for math and science and reading, but art and music and interacting with the city of New York. I mean, even learning our history and going out and seeing the oldest buildings in the city of New York are enriching for all of our students to get them engaged in learning and get them enthusiastic about learning.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. McGuire alluded to the complication of talking about some of the programs that get a lot of air, but represent very few students in the million New York City public school system. So I'm gonna ask this question differently and hope to get through this very quickly. If the graph is ready, Lucas will put it up, but I'll just go over the math on this. Some have asked you whether or not you'll repeal Hex Calandra. I don't know if that's a fair question because that's a state action. But when looking at numbers, there are 80,000 eighth graders in the system, 30,000 take the test, and 5,000 seats are available. So my way of phrasing this question differently is, so only 5,000 out of 30,000 get spots in a program that parents and families and students are working hard to get into. Are we not failing 25,000 of those families? And would it make sense then, instead of talking about repealing, or in addition to talking about it, really create seats to accommodate the 30,000 who want that? So we're going to start with Mr. Adams first, please.
I believe Ray was dead on when, if I understood him correctly, that we focus on a small portion of our students in our schools and not the overwhelming numbers. Yes, I've stated this before. I understand the emotions. I understand everything that is surrounding the specialized high school. Got it. My attention is on those 90% of students that are being ignored. Why can't we open 5 more schools, one in each borough, and use different criteria in those 5 new schools? We could use different methods to determine what the definition of gifted and talented it could be. It could be the top percentages of students. It could be using various other metrics from whichever forms we want. I think we're down the wrong path, and that is not the energy I want to spend. We need to be expanding seats to encourage children to reach their full potential. And that's not what we're doing right now. This does not have to be a zero-sum game. This is an opportunity for us to do a better job of improving the lives of all of our students. And that is the direction that I've stated more than once several years ago when we did the report with the board president of the Bronx. We talked about why aren't we opening more seats? Why don't we pay for test prep for those students coming through the system? Why don't we use different metrics to determine the various gifts that our children have? Gifts are more than just exams. You also have gifts in many ways, and we need to be exploring and developing those additional gifts as well.
Thank you, Mr. Adams. Ms. Garcia.
My focus is on expanding the number of seats. I had proposed, similar to the borough president, that we open new high schools and that we specifically do it and offer admittance to the top 10% of middle schoolers by grade point average, regardless of what middle school they come.
To be clear, how many seats are you looking to expand then if it's 10%? Have you calculated that?
Right, so there are about 80,000 eighth graders.
Mm-hmm.
So you're talking about 8,000 additional seats for those schools in the first year, and then it grows obviously with each successive grade going up. But you're really looking at ensuring that there is more opportunity. And this is a model that's been used actually for Texas college admissions and has, changed the makeup of the University of Texas system and really given opportunity across the board. And so I would focus on the expansion of it and reject the idea of scarcity, that we are only focused on the scarcity of those specialized high schools. And, I do have a little bit of experience with the specialized high schools. I did graduate from one of them.
All right, we have a few achievers in the bunch already. Mr. Yang, if you would respond to this question as well.
I agree with the idea of the question. If we have such demand for these excellent high schools, why do we not create more of them? I propose that we create 2 new specialized high schools in each borough, because one issue too is that you have kids who are commuting an hour plus each way to get to their school. If it's like a real commute, that's not great for their development. So you can expand capacity very considerably, almost double, depending upon the size of the new specialized high schools. And I would not abandon the SHSAT. What I would do is something similar to what Catherine's describing, which is consider their academic record, essays, interviews, and other factors, because that's how the kids are going to get evaluated when they're applying to college anyway, 3 years later. We might as well have them experience a process that's more similar to and align with their goals. So keep the test, expand the criteria, and expand the number of selective high schools by 2 in each borough.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Sutton.
This is such an important question. As we all know, the next mayor is going to be really walking into, as Catherine has called it, a shit show in terms of the budget. And so I think that one of the things that I would want to make clear is that my priority would be to establish new specialized high schools in the boroughs like Queens, like the Bronx, that currently are underserved, but would certainly over time be open to more. And I like the idea. I was stationed in Texas 4 times, and I'm well acquainted with teachers and principals and students who have gone through their system and been able to really, no matter where they grew up in Texas, have been able to access a quality education. So I think that does have some merit for us here in New York. But I don't want our kids to grow up thinking that they either get into a specialized high school or their life is just over, because that couldn't be further from the truth. And that's where the early investment in things like apprenticeships and pathways to coding and trade schools and tech and theater and all kinds of different things is so important. I also very much subscribe to the model that's been introduced here in the city the last few years. There have been about 30 schools that have been transformed into community centers. I think we could bring in the private sector. We could do an adopt a school. We could put in vocational centers where parents who are often can be a little fearful of engaging with the school, but they can get their GED. They can engage in their school and their career goals as well. So there's so much that can be done in this area. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Mr. McGuire for his response to this, please.
Yeah, so I want to be clear. I am for excellence in education. I am for the specialized high schools. A prescription can be, let's double them. Let's go from 30,000 to 60,000. And let's make sure that we start earlier, because the people you've talked about, the number of people who've taken the test, there's still a number of people who don't know about the test. So they're not prepared. They've exposed enough to the opportunities to take the test. So I would start much earlier to inform, educate our students that the test is available, that the opportunity is available. I would get them trained so that they can prepare for taking the test, but I would expand the criteria. Having said that, I still got 1 million students that I got to manage. So I got 60,000 there. And as has been said, we need to address what's happened to those million. Even if I double the program, we've yet to address the fundamental issue about New York City education. And how is it that we get the vast majority of our kids to today have not been prepared for a diverse world?
Okay, maybe I can get through the next question quickly because it builds on this, but I want to make sure I touch on GNT. Again, it's a smaller segment of the population. We have some developments there too. But if the graph is ready, it'll come up. But if it's not, I'll go over those numbers. They're very similar. I think about 32,000 take the test for, I think, even fewer seats, maybe about 3,000 or 4,000 seats. there's an eligibility part of that equation too, but do you feel the same way about G&T, or should G&T be treated differently? And we'll pick up where we left off. We'll begin with Mr. McGuire, please. Do you feel the same way?
So the same way, meaning that if I look at this, there are a couple of fundamental issues here. We assume that all of these children, by the time they get into kindergarten, which is the largest percentage of this population as I see it, if you look at that, we assume that all the children are at the same level when they take the test, which is, we know is incorrect. This is what pre-K attempted to address. So we need to begin to, which is why the gifted and talented doesn't work today, because the kids don't arrive at the same level, which is why we want to start from 0 to 4. And as the data says, you need to get those kids ready with parental care, with toddler care ahead of time. So we invest there. And by the way, we also need to make certain that the teachers who are teaching at these levels are adequately compensated. We shouldn't take the teachers who are teaching the most precious part of these children's lives. We shouldn't treat them in a way that they don't get compensated at the same levels. So I'm looking at these numbers and I get 15,000 kindergartners that are tested. Look at how many kindergartners there exist in the system and how many of them don't have the opportunity to be properly nourished, to be properly trained, to have the right child care, to have the right toddler care before the test before we administer the test. So it has to be completely restructured and rethought, not reimagined, but fixed if you're going to have gifted and talented.
Okay, thank you very much. Ms. Sutton, same question. Would your approach to G&T be the same as the specialized high schools?
You know, I think with the G&T, we first have to just recognize we've got gifted and talented kids all across our city that currently aren't getting the resources. They're not getting the enrichment that they deserve. And the fact that, as Ray has pointed out, they don't all arrive at school in the same place. We've got to invest early. We've got to, all the social determinants of health, all of the prenatal factors, as Eric has said, and all of the things that we know generate a vibrant, learning, robust health and readiness to learn and take on that challenge. So I think that in my view, gifted and talented programs need to be expanded. The eligibility criteria needs to be changed so it's not one monolithic criteria for the entire city, but adapted for different schools, different districts, different boroughs.
All right, thank you. Mr. Adams?
Yes, these numbers are extremely revealing, and in fact, it is an indictment, and it's really troubling to understand the low expectation we have for our young people, particularly in Black and Brown communities. And we have to be honest about it. If 65% of any of the ethnic group in this city was not reaching proficiency, it would be a national emergency. And to not acknowledge the hidden racism in our Department of Education and low expectation for Black and Brown children, and then to fail to acknowledge that when we get to these numbers, it is already too late. We're testing kids at 4 years old. They don't reach 4 years old together. They're at a different place. And that is what is alarming, that we fail to understand the seeds that we are planting is setting people up for failure. And that is what must be acknowledged. And if we don't go to the core of the problem, we're going to continue to engage really in a useless conversation because it's far too late. 3K was admirable, it was important, but in reality, that is too late. 1,000 days of life. If we're not willing to go back there, which I am willing to do, we'll never turn around the educational crises that we are experiencing. You know what's interesting?
Right.
Even if your child is not dealing with the failure of education, you are still paying for it because that child that's not educated becomes a weight on our entire city, and your tax dollars is going for the systemic poverty that's created from it.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Adams. Mr. Yang?
One of my boys tested into gifted and talented. We determined it wasn't a good fit, so he's in another public school program. We should face the reality that these programs, in many cases, are what are keeping a lot of families in the city. And that I think getting rid of these programs without some kind of real replacement is making some people think that the city might not be right for them and their family. I would keep these programs. I would expand the criteria to be more holistic and more representative of the different neighborhoods and the demographics of our city. But I think getting rid of these programs is a mistake. I think that they have a lot of value. And I think that we should be trying to have that value be more broadly distributed to more families in our city.
All right, thank you. And Ms. Garcia?
You know, one of the interesting things about this conversation, that I come from a place where in my neighborhood, the public school, with the one that I went to and that I sent my children to, is strong enough that nobody applies for gifted and talented. It's not a thing. You just go to your local school because it's a good school. And that is what we need to strive for across the city. And how you do that is ensuring that every school has real things that are attractive to the kid and to the parent. And that includes, as I discussed before, things like music, things like bilingual education, things like art, and things like being able to activate the city. But I don't believe that you should test a 4-year-old. And I do agree with many of my fellow candidates on this. We need to invest in early childcare. For families under $70,000, I have proposed free childcare in 0 to 3 to ensure that they are prepared when they walk in the schoolhouse door. And also to support women who end up bearing the brunt of much of that childcare and don't have as many opportunities to go to work if that is the burden that they shoulder, or worry because they're in substandard care when they do have to go to work.
Okay.
But I want to make sure that we give kids the opportunities so that they can really thrive in their elementary school.
Okay, thank you. Now I want to get to some current events as a news person. There are 2 things that have happened that I wanted to get your reaction to. The first is the panel on education policy and their move to not sign that contract, or to vote against the contract for G&T testing, which is just around the corner for parents. And I would also like to see if you would want to go on the record and say something about the 43,000 students that left the public school system. At this rate, when you become mayor, you may be looking at close to 100,000 fewer children in the New York City public school system. Are there budget ramifications? How do you see these 2 current developments? Let's begin with Mr. McGuire, please.
So your first question?
Is on the panel for education policy, voting against the contract that would provide for G&T testing. So right now, we don't know what G&T testing is going to look like this year, if it's going to happen at all.
So as I think we've tried to discuss, the numbers that you've just shown here reflect a crisis. And the fact that we continue with a program that shows the systemic inequities in the system is not something that we should continue with. So unless we can make it equitable overnight, which is not going to cure the crisis, we need to figure out how we cure the crisis before we continue the program.
And you also have time to respond to the 43,000 students who have left the New York City public school system. How do you see that?
So that, I think, is reflective of where we are in the crisis. We've identified a crisis of COVID. We've identified a crisis of the economy, a crisis of what's taking place with our policing, and a crisis in education. And our New Yorkers recognize that alternatives exist unless we come in and repair this. And so what has to be of immediate importance, and I have a vision of the economy and safety, security, and quality of life and education as a premier priority in my administration. We have to address this. We need to attract 42,000 people, not lose 42,000 families because the education system does not work for them.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Adams, if you'd comment on these 2 developments.
Yes, first the gifted and talented testing. I think it's important, as I continue to say, that families should be able to opt into the G&T testing and not opt out. They should, every child should have an opportunity to do so. In addition to that, during the report and study by Borough President Diaz and I, we found that access to gifted and talented program. Many districts did not have the programs. Family had to travel far to get in the program. There were so many obstacles and barriers. But I also agree with what Catherine Garcia stated. All of our schools should be gifted and talented and have the access. We need to do a complete analysis. As mayor, we're going to look at all of our schools who have the music programs, PSAL sports activities, who have all of those things that are needed. We give basic education in poorer communities, and we give excellent education in others. This is not just schooling, this is education. And dealing with those who we saw that are leaving the city to take their children out, it comes to the same thing. We were hemorrhaging people long before COVID. Quality of life is important. We are in the business of recruiting for talent. People come here to go to school, to start their families, and to retire. If we don't have a safe place where children could be educated and gainfully employed as families, we're going to lose New Yorkers. And that is something we must turn around, and that is what I'm committed to do.
All right, thank you. Ms. Garcia, you're next, and given your background, wondering, what you see as the budget implications of losing 43,000 students out of the public school system, and how you would reorganize funding that way.
Thank you for that question. And I think it's incredibly concerning that we see that loss of students, and hopefully they have moved with their families somewhere else and they haven't just dropped out of the system, but are still here and we're not educating them. The one thing I would say about this is, how school funding works is based on the number of kids. And so you would think that that would drive down the amount of money, but we will be losing on the other side as well, because all of those families pay income tax and property taxes in the city of New York. So the budget implications happen on both sides of the ledger. So there isn't a great big savings that comes with losing kids, because you're also losing the revenue that supports them going forward. But we need also to be focused on the fact that we are going to have to catch up a whole year of education. And that is going to require resources and remediation and push in of extra teachers to ensure that we are getting kids up to grade level when they return to their buildings.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Garcia. Ms. Sutton?
Yeah, I put myself in the role of a parent and think about everything that parents have gone through over this last year. And now this, in terms of the policy panel decision today. I think that the timing is poor. I think the communication has been flawed. I think that it would be very important to look at that graph, the numbers of the gifted and talented pool that you showed a few minutes ago. It would be great to see that distributed around the city, because as Eric said, you're going to find wide swaths of the city that, since the last mayor was in power, have just lost their gifted and talented programs. I think we could increase the gifted and talented programs without penalizing other parents, other families, other kids who are in areas that still have them. That's not the final answer for sure. School enrichment absolutely has a place, and we need to make sure that we cater to the strengths of every child and invest in their full potential. But I think, from the botched reopening, we should be open right now. The schools are not the places where the COVID virus is transmitting wildly. Sure, some teachers are always going to have to stay home because of health issues. Some kids are, but the vast majority can be brought forward, and there are so many things that we could have done and still could do in an all-of-city effort.
Gotcha. Thank you, Ms. Sutton. Mr. Yang?
I disagree with the decision to discontinue gifted and talented testing, particularly in the absence of a new alternative. I think it's terrible leadership, and we should not have any illusions about the fact that these two numbers are directly related, that families are looking up and saying, is New York where my kids are going to flourish? They look up and see that gifted and talented now, they don't know what comes next, and then they're voting with their feet. I know this in part because I'm a public school parent. We are here, our kids still in school, but we have friends who are leaving. So we need to let people know that New York City is going to invest in our kids. We cannot get rid of the G&T screening without a concrete alternative. And in the absence of that concrete alternative, we should have kept it. And then we can look at broadening it so that more families enjoy some of these enrichment programs that reflect the composition of our city, but getting rid of it was a mistake.
All right, thank you, Mr. Yang. My next question is about 20% of the students in the public school population, and they are the students who are dealing with or struggling, however we describe it, with disabilities. Students that require individualized education plans. Vouchers are issued for students if the service that they require is not at their school, But looking at a neighborhood by neighborhood breakdown that I got, I saw that in some neighborhoods, they clearly were not being claimed. If their child's been identified as requiring an IEP, why are these vouchers not being claimed? Let's begin with Mr. Yang this time.
I can speak to this directly because one of my boys got an IEP, and certainly it wasn't easy. There was a lot of bureaucracy involved. And then if you do have a voucher for services, you count yourself very, very fortunate. In my opinion, in a lot of those cases, like those families found another environment for their kid, and then they're not making use of the voucher, because if they're here in the city and they get that voucher, they're going to want to use it. It's not easy to get one. So I have a feeling that's what's happening. It's related again to some of these issues where the city needs to be investing in special needs families like mine, whose kids need different curriculum, different levels of resources. And there's a massive opportunity here, because when the city does not meet the needs of a special needs family, the city often ends up paying more, not less. That's the way that things work, in part because these vouchers you're describing. And New York City actually has this high concentration of special needs families like mine. And so there's an opportunity to create schools that actually serve the needs of boys like our son, and save money. So that's where we should be investing as a community.
Thank you, Mr. Yang. Ms. Garcia?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and I appreciate the challenges that kids with special needs kids face and the families face. And obviously, Andrew's making it through the bureaucracy successful. I think one of the challenges for families who do get vouchers is that there aren't people near them that can provide the service. Like might not have a physical therapist near their house. They might not have a speech therapist near their house or somewhere close by. We need to make it in those areas that those are available at the school building, so that they are not letting the voucher go to waste because they can't find the practitioner to provide that service for the kid. Because you're absolutely right. If we don't support children, this is why early intervention was so critically important. You change the trajectory for that kid's entire educational life. The earlier you are intervening to provide them the support, and folks in my life who have dyslexia, the earlier that they were identified and able to given like the toolkit to make it so that they could perform at a high level, the better they will do over the course of their life. And so we need to ensure that that is available for every family, but also recognize the barriers in some neighborhoods to actually being able to procure the service.
Right. I think that's a great point there. Thank you. Ms. Sutton, if you'd reply to that one too.
Sure. I think one of the issues brought in, really exposed by the pandemic might be helpful in this regard. Some of these services may be available remotely through telehealth and telemedicine types of services, but certainly any child who has been identified with a need that needs to be met with specialized services, we have a responsibility, a sacred duty to make sure that that child gets what he or she needs. I think that, this is exactly one of the things that worries me so much right now, is that we have a whole group of children with special needs in our schools right now who over this last year have not done well with the remote learning. And we didn't do the things that could have been done and should have been done and could easily have been foreseen. And these are also kids, they may come from served neighborhoods, Black and brown kids who are living in less than ideal family and home circumstances. Domestic violence has gone up by over double. We've got a lot of things going on that we don't even see right now, given the state that the botched school reopening has left us.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Sutton. Mr. Adams, if you take that one on.
Yes, it's imperative to understand what is the city's model. The city model is fend for yourself. Basically, you're immigrant, you're poor, you're Black, you're brown, survive on your own. And we know what the end results are. I gave you the numbers. 80% of the men and women at Rikers Island don't have a high school diploma equivalency. Probably 30% are dyslexic, 55% have a learning disability, 48% have mental health issues. Our plan is incarceration. And that is what is really troubling, and that is what angers me. We know at the beginning of the school year that we are going to produce broken boys that are going to turn into broken adults and going to have broken families. We know that, and that's the game plan. So we say, let's not identify dyslexia. Let's not test it in every school. If we do, we have to provide services. If we don't, we can act like it doesn't exist. We are denying basic rights of people. I partner with Lucina Clark from My Time Inc., and she's doing an amazing job. Let's empower nonprofits to be navigators for non-English speakers as second language and those who are economically challenged, so we can help them navigate a complex system that is working against them. And we know we are setting them up for failing. And I am really troubled about that, and I'm going to turn that around.
Thank you, Mr. Adams. And Mr. McGuire, you're going to be our final word on this.
Thank you. I agree with a lot of what's been said. I'd just like to identify that now is an extraordinary opportunity for us to begin to address what is systemic, which has to do with those who are disabled, maybe physically disabled, maybe emotionally disabled. We've yet to address that. And the opportunity to create investments in the teachers, in the paraprofessionals, and my middle brother is a paraprofessional, and I know how important the paraprofessionals are to how we engage with these students. And we ought to do it in a way that still allows the dignity for the students and puts them in an environment where there's a caring teacher and a system that, even without being in the actual school system, that you have the not-for-profits that can come in and help and support those and to support the community services that can help to support the teachers. First, I would make sure that the teachers are well supported, because the teachers are going to be fundamental to this, that you have the structures, the physical structures in place, that you have the mental health care professionals in place, and that we've supported them, and that we have the wraparound services that can serve as an insurance policy in the communities. And unless we address this, what has been identified by Eric, when it comes to the essentially the pipeline that we have created, a systemic pipeline that we've created by not investing in this group of people, by not investing in the entire system, it's going to cost us a lot more later, and the impact on society is going to be a lot greater. And so we have the opportunity today, with the right commitment and focus, to address issues which are so fundamental to how this city works.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. McGuire. That brings that closes the time for the main questions. I'm going to do the lightning round now, which will be equally fun, I'm sure, for all of you guys. My first question is for the yes/no: is do grades matter, or should we teach in the middle? Right. So the question is, do grades matter? This is asked in the context of the New York education leaders waiving the region's high school exit exam requirements, and now also asking the federal government for permission to cancel the state standardized exams for a second year in a row. So in our lightning round, beginning with Mr. Yang, yes/no: do grades matter?
Yes.
All right. Ms. Sutton.
Yes.
Mr. McGuire.
Yes.
Ms. Garcia.
Yes.
Mr. Adams.
Yes.
All right. The second lightning round question: will you restore G&T testing? You become mayor in January, and as Ms. Garcia has used a different term, explaining the show that you will inherit, will you in January, if G&T testing isn't there, reinstate it until another plan can be in place? We'll begin with Mr. Adams. Yes, no, sir?
A new plan I will install.
All right. Ms. Garcia.
A new plan.
Mr. McGuire.
A new plan.
Ms. Sutton.
Sign me up. New plan.
Mr. Yang.
Yes, with adjustments.
All right. I heard the yes. Next lightning round question: will you convert charter schools in historically underrepresented parts of the city into public schools, whether they be high schools, specialized or not, G&T, for whatever grade? These are schools that are already successful in neighborhoods where we need to beef things up. Let's begin with Ms. Sutton.
I want to make sure I understand the question.
Yeah, I gotta make sure I understand that one.
Good job as a journalist, right? All right. Charter schools are already serving neighborhoods in this city that need help, and there are charter schools that are quite successful at it.
Yes.
My yes/no question is, should an effort be made to make these charter schools part of what almost everybody here has said is the formula they want to expand access to better education, which means converting them into the public school system to either become specialized high schools or G&T schools or just regular schools, but given their success already geographically in those neighborhoods. Did I do a better job this time? So we'll begin with Ms. Sutton.
Still muddy, Arthur.
I want to make sure that we're not saying we take successful charter schools and fold them into the regular system. If what you're saying is that this could be perhaps the substrate for new specialized high schools in some of the underserved areas, and as we've talked about, absolutely. But let me say another thing about charter schools.
Well, I'm going to try to keep them yes, no there. But,
sorry.
But you get a half of my salary for moderating this panel. Mr. McGuire, yes, no, sir?
Would I convert what's working into something that is speculative? I would keep what's working.
Okay, great. Ms. Garcia?
I would keep what's working.
All right. Mr. Adams?
I would keep what's working.
All right, and Mr. Yang?
I would keep what's working.
Okay, second to last lightning round question. Would you support PTAs augmenting funding for schools? Should schools that fundraise the most money share with schools that are unable to fundraise? Let's start with Mr. McGuire. Yes, no, sir?
Would I share the funding of those people who have been successful funding with others? I would share the resources.
Yes. Ms. Garcia?
I would share to a point, having been on the PTA and on the student leadership.
We'll take that as a qualified yes. Mr. Adams?
I would encourage sharing the skills to fundraise in other schools.
All right. Mr. Yang?
My wife is the co-head of the PTA, so can I check with her? I'm going to say I think it should be up to the community.
Okay. And Ms. Sutton?
Yes.
Yes. All right. Last lightning round question. And some of you have already asked this, so I'm going to ask it as a two-part yes, no, because somebody on this panel, I won't say who, hasn't been asked this question as far as I know on the record yet. When you become mayor, will Chancellor Carranza stay on the job? Yes, no. And if it's a no, do you already have in mind who might, well, do you already have somebody in mind to replace him with? Let's begin with Mr. Yang.
No, he would not stay in the job, and I am working on the second half.
Okay, Ms. Sutton?
No, he would not stay on the job, and I do have a short list in mind.
Okay, Mr. McGuire?
No, he would not, and I do have a short list in mind.
All right, Ms. Garcia?
No, he would not. And I do have some thoughts about who might be.
And Mr. Adams? Bring us
No,
home.
he does not. I know who my next chancellor would be.
Can you share, Eric?
Yeah.
You're the only one who had a specific person, Eric. That's why you're on the spot. Let's make some news.
On that note and on these smiles, we thank all the panelists, all the mayoral candidates for being here. Some may question your sanity for taking on this challenge, but we applaud your courage and your vision and appreciate your time getting into these very complicated but very important questions to the people of New York City. So thank you so much for being here and answering these questions, guys.
Thank you.
Hey, everyone.
For having us. Well done.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
All right, take care, guys.
Eyes on the prize.